So to introduce our speaker, I am very excited to welcome tonight's moderator, Professor Ralph Armbruster-Sandoval, the chair of the UC Santa Barbara Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies. He's the author of Starving for Justice, Hunger Strikes, Spectacular Speech, and The Struggle for Dignity. He's long been involved in movements for social justice and has lived in Santa Barbara for 22 years. So welcome, Professor Sandoval.
Thank you, Michael, so much for for inviting us and for making this program happen tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. Really admire, of course, Chaucer's books. Kind of a bibliophile, of course, as an academic, and great to have an independent bookstore like Chaucer's in Santa Barbara for so many years. So thanks for the warm introduction. I want to introduce Jacob Soboroff, who is, as Michael said, reporter for NBC and MSNBC and author of Separated: Inside an American Tragedy, which came out earlier this year. And welcome, Jacob.
Professor, it's so great to be with you. And I think we should tell everybody before we start how this event came to be.
Yeah, go for it.
If I might, yeah. So I was on a like a little family trip. I lived down in LA and we were up north in your neck of the woods. And I stopped by Chaucer's on the way back just to see if Separated: Inside American Tragedy, my book, was in stock and if I might sign a copy or whatever. And I walked in and there was a guy holding a copy of my book, looking like he was getting ready to buy it. And I walked up to him and I said, and I was wearing a mask and the other guy was wearing a mask. And I said, not to be weird, but I wrote that book. And turns out that guy was you and you were purchasing the book. And that whole experience just blew my mind. So we stayed in touch over email and social media or whatever, and decided to get together to have a chat about it here with Chaucer. So yeah, it was meant to be.
Totally, very serendipitous. And I told my family, and well, frankly, Jacob, I recognize you from the old, TV. And I looked at you kind of sideways, like, is this really this guy? Is he in here right now? No way.
Well, I think it was only this.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you can't recognize folks. But anyways, great.
But no, and I mean, I really mean it. I mean, that was serendipitous. You're right. And I'm really glad to be doing this with you and with Chaucer. So thanks for being willing to do this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for writing the book and caring to write the book. Also, I just want to mention that I just looked up too before getting started. You're on Democracy Now! Program that a lot of people know about, I think in late July.
That's right, yeah. Right around the time the book came out, yeah.
Yeah, so that was good. And I think that's, in other words, that was my light bulb to go on, like, this book came out. Because sometimes, there's so many good darn books coming out, you kind of forget. And so I was like, okay, I got to check out this guy's book. And there it was in the bookstore. And
I love that it was, go ahead.
Those guys at Chaucer's Books do such a great job of putting all the latest, greatest books out there so you can get your eyes on them, right?
And they had it right in front, and I was really grateful for that too. And it's cool to hear you talk about that. You saw me talking about Democracy Now! Because for me, I actually think I mentioned Democracy Now! In the book very briefly in the end. My college professor, one of my college professors, turned me on to Democracy Now! I guess would have been 2002, 2003. And I've been a fan of that program ever since. It was a real honor to be on with Amy and Juan.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I read your little, not footnotes, but yeah, you mentioned your professor.
And the acknowledgements, I think, yeah.
So hey, so let's plunge into this.
Sure.
And like Michael had said, that we're definitely, I think we want to talk for a few minutes. We don't want to be just a total dialogue or monologue back and forth.
Sure.
We want to get folks who are out there participating. I see a number of people there, and hopefully we'll get some more people.
That's great. No, I'd love to hear from folks too.
See how this conversation goes. So Jacob, you and I talked yesterday, kind of a little preparation for today. Can you just, basically start out like how the book got started and your little notebook basically, and then going to, and maybe kind of going there, then we have to go backwards in time. But June of 18, just take us right there. Like you got called out there, so to speak, and you went live and the story went viral, and some of it had been known about, but can you just start at the start, so to speak, the very short story about the little notebook?
Yeah, well, I feel like, what, it's funny, I didn't think about this before we sat down. Give me a second, I think I have it. I want to show it to you. This is, I'm going to pop off the screen for 1 second. I'll be right back.
Okay, live TV.
Here I come. Don't worry, I'm still here.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll just put my earphones back in. So, you know, I always say I'm a very unlikely eyewitness to, I think, what ended up being and will be remembered as one of the most shameful chapters in modern American history. And I really do mean that, family separations, as we all know, just to set sort of the context. Today, we know, according to experts, doctors, child welfare specialists, physicians for human rights calls it torture. The American Academy of Pediatrics calls it government-sanctioned child abuse. But for me, I ended up in the middle of it as a journalist without really knowing how we got there. And when I saw it, for me, the reason I wanted to write the book was that I could not comprehend how our government did this to 5,500 children, basically in our name, right? All of us as Americans. And for me, that realization really started when I got on the ground. And after having covered what I thought were sort of the key immigration issues of the Trump administration for NBC and MSNBC, I ended up literally in the epicenter in two different facilities that were the center of the child separation policy. Casa Padre, which was a former Walmart in Brownsville, Texas, and the McAllen Central Processing Station of the Border Patrol in McAllen, Texas. And you mentioned the notebook. This is it. It makes up this is the spine of the book. And what it really is the notes I took when I went inside those facilities. And like, here you go. I don't know if you can read my writing, but 5 beds per room. And I remember what that meant. 5 beds instead of 4. They had a variance there. It says here, variance state of, I haven't looked at this page in a long time. It says variance state of Texas, extra cots starting in May, 313 rooms. Some of this stuff isn't even in the book. Trump mural by the cafeteria.
Yeah.
And so, I turned the notes that were in this notebook into, my jumping off point for really trying to understand how our government did this to these kids. And sorry for the long answer, but that's how I got started doing this.
Right. So I was thinking about this today too, just before we got started. This is just my take on the book in terms of being almost like 3 books. So you have like the general story, the reporting, the players, the organizations that were involved, Jeff Sessions, Stephen Miller, Scott Lloyd, Jonathan White. There's a whole array of figures, which is really amazing, just to kind of get like your head around, like, how did this thing roll out? What was the implementation of it? Who were the players and whatnot? But then you also have this story that connects it too with the Guatemalan family, with Juan and with Jose. And then you have kind of also like your own story too, like kind of your own transformation. So I kind of like, maybe this is my own take on it. I see like 3 books in 1 book kind of thing. But so I kind of like that. There's different ways I want to kind of approach our conversation. Sure. But does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think for me, that, the way I set out to understand it was to do exactly as you described. Like, I knew my story was my story. I knew how I approached this and how I saw it and understood it, or didn't understand it, I think is probably more accurate. And I thought the first thing I did was I chronologically laid out everything that happened to me personally, what I saw and what I experienced and what I reported. And then I tried to overlay that with, I knew I had met Juan and Jose and I had covered them, but I didn't know sort of their backstory and what happened as they, before we got together. And then there was all these documents from officials and people involved in the policies that I was able to get. So what I did was I just said, look, I'm going to lay this all out chronologically. And just like you said, they're basically 3 separate stories that are also obviously very interrelated. And at times they cross. We talk about Kirstjen Nielsen. At a certain point, I sat down with her and did an interview, the same day that Donald Trump threatened to fire her in front of the cabinet. Juan and Jose, I met them late in their journey of being separated, but there were some of the similar places that we had been, and seen. And so, yeah, that's exactly right. I tried to reconcile these 3 different kind of buckets by putting them all together in one story.
Yeah. So can you share with folks about Juan and Jose?
Of course.
Let's talk a little bit about their story.
Yeah, so they're from Petén, Guatemala, which is the department, which I guess you could say is like the equivalent of the states in Guatemala, to the north of the furthest north in Guatemala. A lot of the Maya ruins are there. Really, it's a very biologically diverse area. There's a lot of rainforest. But recently, it's become a place where narco trafficking is very prominent. And when you fly over it, I've never done that, but when you fly over it, you can look it up on YouTube. Lots of airports. And those airports are not marked on any navigational chart or map. They're clandestine airstrips for narco traffickers. And so in that region, there is a lot of violence and a lot of cartel operations. And Juan ended up being threatened through the course of basically what was a shakedown. He had sold his car to somebody else. That person sold their car to another person. And then, the way that he describes it to me and in his asylum claim, the second person came back to him and tried to get him to sign over the paperwork. He didn't have the right to it. And basically they threatened his life and his son's life. And the reason I love on a personal level, but also their story, Juan and Jose, is that Juan had tried to cross into the United States successfully. He did twice before. And he made it in. And when, one night when we were sitting together after they had been reunited after 5 months, he said to me, they didn't catch me. And he kind of laughed. And I thought it was important to include their story and not sort of the story of the perfect, really super sad stand-up individual, because it doesn't really matter who you are or what you did. For me, this is a story about 5,500 people getting tortured by the US government. And my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Al Sharpton, gave the eulogy for George Floyd. And when he gave the eulogy, I'm a Jewish guy from LA, so I'm not very biblical, but he gave the eulogy by reading a passage where he talked about the rejected stone becoming the cornerstone of the story. And he talked about George Floyd being an imperfect person.
Yeah.
And to me, when I heard him say that, and this was long after I'd written the book, it really clicked with me. I said, man, these guys are the rejected stone. I'm sure there are people that would point to them to say they snuck in before, they shouldn't have been here, they got what they deserved. To me, it couldn't be. Immediately I thought of them and I said, that is why, without knowing that biblical passage, I picked those guys, because they aren't perfect. But it doesn't matter if you're perfect or not. What this story is about is what the government did to so many people. And to them specifically, separated them for 5 months. They arrived in Arizona. Juan was sent here to the high desert of Southern California, Adelanto. Jose was sent to BCFS in Harlingen, not far from Casa Padre. Juan was coerced into signing away the right to reunite. Right. And were it not for a lawyer, he probably would have been one of the 666 parents who the government couldn't find at this point, and still separated from his son. But because of his lawyer at Immigrant Defenders Law Center here in LA, they won the right to reunite. They got back together, and their story ended up with a positive is not the right word, but with an outcome that still hundreds didn't get to have and still haven't had to have, which is to get back together after being taken for no other reason than they showed up here to seek asylum.
Yeah, it was an amazing story. Is there something that connected you with those two guys? Maybe you with your son, I was thinking, or just like, I imagine you bumped into other folks that you could have revolved the book around, but
yeah,
why those two guys specifically?
I loved spending time with them. I did go inside detention and I met Juan when he was incarcerated. And so I sort of knew him, and I had seen him twice, I think, before I decided to even start to write the book. And when I finally sat, I was considering, should I write about them? Should I write about another family that I had been covering? And when I went to sit down with them and I think I write about this in the book, a chain steakhouse in DC, he started showing me pictures of his son on his phone. And when I looked at the pictures, I said to myself, that kid looks like me when I was a teenager, and I just identified with them. I don't know. And we couldn't come from more, as I said, like, I'm a privileged Jewish guy from LA, these guys are coming from a small, pueblo in Guatemala, in Petén, Guatemala, where this life, especially to Jose, who had never come here before, was literally completely foreign to him. But there was something about our interactions and our exchanges where I just loved these guys and I love spending time with them. And to this day, we were WhatsApping yesterday, we keep in very close touch.
Yeah, you developed a real good rapport. I mean, of course, the reporter has to do that,
Yeah.
but there's some kind of knack going on there in terms of that magic, if you will, in terms of reading that.
They were so open with me, we would talk on FaceTime with his wife and his daughters. He trusted me, and I trusted him.
Right.
And I think that, you can kind of tell when you get to know somebody, when you have a special relationship. And I just felt like we developed that from the get-go,
Right. Can you just talk a little bit too? I want to get back to the June story where it went viral and everything blowing up there, but just a little bit about your evolution in terms of the
Sure.
story and how, like, eventually, I think I told you yesterday, I remember on page 233, like Donald Trump told one too many lies, and then you said something kind of snapped in you. But can you just, like, again, you're dealing, you're separated, to use the title, separated from pretend, separated from this story. Like you said, privileged Jewish kid living in LA.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of go down, what do they say? Alice in Wonderland, down
right.
the rabbit hole. So just, sorry.
No, I was just thinking about it. Like, you're right. And I was saying to you yesterday when we talked, I haven't really thought much about, when I wrote the book and I picked the title, for me, that's what it meant. It meant not only the physical separation that people like Juan and Jose endured, but it was the separation, the mental separation that so many of us have from the realities of how we got to this point. And that means a lot of things to me. In now understanding this far better than I did when I was in the middle of it, it means decades of deterrence-based, punitive-based immigration policies meant to scare people from coming to this country under Democrats and Republicans. I am certain, were it not for both political parties, Donald Trump would not have been able to, like that, separate 5,500 children. The system was set up for him to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And, there are, in some way, it makes you think, well, man, maybe I'm the totally wrong guy to write this book, but I do think that there are a lot more people, unfortunately, like me in this country who didn't have a keen understanding and certainly not the lived experience to get how Donald Trump was able to do this so easily. And I think it's a hard pill to swallow. Like, even in our audience at MSNBC, I don't think necessarily a lot of the people that watch me on a regular basis want to hear that Democrats are in some way responsible for what Donald Trump was able to do. But there's no doubt that they were. And that's sort of the separation. There's the physical separation, but there is that other separation where, even though I grew up in LA and, I grew up around probably the largest Latinx population in the United States of America, and I marched in the marches in 2005 and 2006 after college for comprehensive immigration reform and all these things. Even as a young aspiring journalist, I went down to Tijuana and reported on Obama's deportations. I still didn't. At my first instinct was that this is Donald Trump's American tragedy, and ultimately the book became separated just inside an American tragedy. It's not Donald Trump's tragedy. He only supersized a system that was already tragic in so many ways and remains. And not to get too far ahead here, but like, it's my great worry about the Biden-Harris administration, that the people who so passionately literally went into the streets to protest this policy, the tens of thousands of people that bought and are reading my book are just going to put it down because there's a Democratic president.
Right.
And that's the last thing I want them to do,
Right. Well, I think born out of the, maybe we're getting ahead a little bit of the story, but born out of the example of the Obama administration and looking at Obama being a savior-like figure almost, and then having that obviously blow up in people's face, I don't think that people will rest easy,
Right.
and there's no need to, so to speak. But there's no ability to rest. But can you just talk a little bit too, just about the mechanics of actually how this kind of rolled out? Because, in reading the book, there were so many people that were effectively lying, And so when you get lied to one too many times, I mean, I think maybe my parents' generation, the folks in the 60s and 70s, when they would have the 5 o'clock volleys for the Vietnam War, and they said that we're winning, and then you hear like the body count, so to speak, and we really weren't winning. So so I was reading, I think, in New York Times too, about the article that you mentioned about the 545 kids that still haven't been reunited, but now it's like 666. That there was this pilot program that I don't think that you mentioned in the book, and it might not have been knowledge at the time. But so in the lead up of, like, say, March or February of 17, John Kelly becomes the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security.
Correct.
And then this, like they know this, like the guy Jonathan White, working for the Office of Refugee Resettlement. That's a real hero in the book, I think. Anyways, they start tracking this, and they go, something's up, you guys.
That's right.
And they're like, nah, don't worry about it, you guys, we got this. And there's so many things that are infuriating. And then they start tracking it. They know there's a significant increase. Somebody says, can't you guys just create a little box to maybe you reunite them? And then Scott Lloyd, the head of the OR, says, I think we should just destroy this list.
Can you believe it?
Like catch your hair on fire.
It's unbelievable.
So
to me, to me, when I heard that story, Dan Diamond from Politico had kind of reported the I'll get to it in a second, but the overall, I'll go back, but the overall kind of outline that this guy, Scott Lloyd, who was a Trump appointee, was a former official at the Knights of Columbus, the Catholic fraternal organization. I mean, he was most famous before separations for setting up a policy where he literally tracked the menstrual cycles of women in the custody of the federal government, and would approve, or I guess not approve, make anyone who wanted to have an abortion go to him. Long story short, in April of 2018, Scott Lloyd, after the list leaked to Caitlin Dickerson of the New York Times that there was around 700 kids that had been separated by the administration, even though they had denied they were doing it, like you said, early 2017, they had met on this. It leaked to the public. John Kelly, briefly acknowledged they were considering it, but then you didn't hear anything about it again until November of 2017, where Lomi Creel from the Houston Chronicle said, look, in the El Paso area, there's a lot of separations going on, but we don't really know what's going on, but something's going on. We're not sure. Jonathan White would go from HHS internally around to his superiors like Scott Lloyd, or even Kevin McAleenan, who was the Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, and say, look, here's the data. The data says we got a lot of separated kids here, and these are way higher than the numbers that we ever had before. No, everything's cool. I'll take a look at it. Don't worry about it. Meanwhile, 700 kids have been separated by April of 2018. And when Scott Lloyd got the word that list had leaked to the New York Times, instead of saying, what can I do to reunite those parents and children? How do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? What did he say? What was his first instinct? Let's get rid of the list. He confirmed this. He confirmed this subsequent to the book coming out. He said, I briefly considered it. And thank goodness he didn't do that, because it was the critical linkage, this informal list, because the record keeping was so poor, between the children that were separated and the parents where they ultimately ended up. And that's another one of the heroes, Jim De La Cruz, inside the Office of Refugee Resettlement, who for years, even back into the Obama administration, where there were very limited separations on the border, was keeping track of each and every one. And so it just goes to show the incompetence. But it goes beyond incompetence to cruelty, where not just in HHS, but in DHS and in the Department of Justice, we now know that career officials warned their Trump-appointed superiors that this was going on and these would be the consequences. And here we are today with 666 kids whose parents literally cannot be found or haven't been found by the government. And we reported today a story about how, maybe you want to talk about this a little bit, but how they squashed even today a settlement that would have paid for the mental health therapy for the children who were traumatized for life by this policy, all the way up to the White House.
Yeah, talk about Stephen Miller and what he did in that, and just maybe Stephen Miller in general, who's such
a...
Hey, I'm sorry, Jacob. I was looking at Jane. Is it Jane or Jean Guerrero's book?
I was just going to say, Jean's book is so good.
Go ahead, man. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, if you really want to know about Stephen Miller, read Jean's book, which I think you also bought the same day that I saw you, and Roberto Lovato's book.
Yeah.
I think that I've never met Miller in person. I've seen him once, and I wrote about it in the book, and I said, who is this fucking psycho? Excuse me for saying that, but that was my initial reaction,
We're not on radio, so you could say that.
Exactly. And he was screaming, at the top of his lungs about Kate Steinle, who was tragically killed by an undocumented immigrant. But he applied his venom for that one person and that one killing and this poor woman who was murdered, to everybody who was undocumented in the country, you know? And to me, it just, none of that computed. And I'm like, this guy is out of his mind. Well, look, what do we know now about Stephen Miller? What have I reported with my colleagues at NBC since the book came out? Not only did he have a show of hands vote in the Situation Room about moving forward with separations in May of 2018, but more recently, he personally, according to sources we talked to, killed the settlement agreement that was brought on behalf of all the children to give them mental health care to deal with the profound trauma that these separations have created. And, you know, I already said, we're talking about torture. We're talking about government-sanctioned child abuse. We're talking about, you know, as one person told me in the book, and I write about, the greatest humanitarian catastrophe of my lifetime, referring to domestic, you know, U.S. affairs. And so what do I think about Stephen Miller? You know, I think that he was the architect. I think that the evidence shows that he obviously did not care about these people at all with any shred of humanity. And it's horrifying, honestly.
Yeah. He's a dangerous man. I mean, no doubt about it. He's also from SoCal. He's also a person of privilege.
Yeah.
And
another white Jewish boy from LA, to be honest.
I wasn't going to say that. But the two roads diverged, I guess, right?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm just glad that I only crossed paths with him in that Colorado ballroom in 2016 and never before.
Yeah, you should have maybe checked him back then. No, I'm just kidding.
And, you know, look, the way that he looks at refugees and migrants and you know, very specifically the 5,500 children that were taken away from their parents, I can't get in his head, but I don't think he sees human beings, you know? And I said to his wife, his now wife, but then she was his girlfriend secretly, Katie Miller, who was a spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security. How can you feel this way, having seen what I saw with my own eyes? And I asked her, are you a white nationalist? And she said, no, but I don't believe we should have little Havanas. And my jaw dropped to the floor. Right. But those are the people, these people that we're dealing with in the White House, you know? That's the underlying ethos, the Scott Lloyd, why don't we just get rid of the list? You know, it's like, there is no compassion. There is no humanity. Nobody is seeing people as people. They're seeing them as, I have no idea, political pawns or props or whatever it is. It's not as the human beings that I saw with my own eyes.
Right. And so when you did see him with your own eyes, though, and you did the reporting, you know, it sort of went viral. Like your Twitter feed blew up. You had all these followers.
Yeah. People
were pissed, you know, and the administration said they didn't like the optics of having kids, you know, on the floor and having the blankets over them and whatnot. But, you know, I mean, Trump and my take on Trump and the wall, just one little thing is that I think that Trump wanted to build a wall around our hearts. And so to kind of separate us from them.
I think you're right.
Not really to give a darn about them, you know, and you know, like you said, like you would do some story on Today maybe, and you kind of like, hopefully it would kind of tear somebody's heart out. And then you check like on the feed and they'd say, oh, it's the kid's fault. I mean, not the kid's fault, the parents' fault and whatnot.
Right.
So, you know, the lack of heart, the lack of caring that's in the White House kind of trickles down, right? Bad kind of trickle down.
There's no doubt about it. And you see it today with the voting and the recounts and all this stuff. I mean, they're living, the president's supporters are living in a distinct echo chamber. And maybe the same can be said about people on the left. I have no idea, you know, but in this particular instance, that's what it always was. You know, it's always, they deserve it. And that's what I'm saying. That's why I go back to Juan and Jose. It's like, that's why I wanted to use their story, because they are the exact people that the president would point to say, look at this guy's, this is his third time breaking the law. He's out of here. But for me, it's not about that. For me, this is a story about that I think one day will be remembered with the other ignoble acts that our government has perpetrated on people who have come here. You know, from the very beginning, or as a matter of fact, not just the people who've come here, but the white people who came here and perpetrated on the native population. It's going to be remembered with genocide, and it's going to be remembered with slavery, and it's going to be remembered with Japanese internment, and it's going to be remembered with the turning around of the St. Louis and sending Jews back to the Holocaust. I really do think that this chapter, the purposeful torture of innocent refugee children, will one day really be remembered as that. But right now, because of what you describe, the president can say something and everybody just takes it to the bank, and then it becomes a Twitter battle. I'm not sure we're there yet, which is also part of the reason I want to do the book.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned maybe when you went on Joy Reid's show, and just like a little, I want to invoke Professor Laura Briggs. She wrote this book called Taking Children, and each one of the chapters has, because this is not, I'm teaching this class right now at UCSB, it's called Races of American History. And sometimes I say, I haven't said this for a while, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
So we've seen Native American kids taken for boarding schools.
Yep.
We've seen, of course, Africans during slavery were separated, family separation. So you could say the H. Rap Brown, famous Black Panther, said, violence is American as apple pie, but family separations for Black folks, for Asian, Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, Latinx people, I mean, like you name it.
It really is
the latest episode.
And I should say, like, you know, again, I've learned a lot since the book has come out and since I got into all this, but family separation, while everybody said, you know, Obama didn't do it, there are different forms of family separation. And go look at the book. There's another book called Separated by Dr. William Lopez. Yep. And his book is about separations in the interior by ICE raids.
Yep.
And, you know, his book is looking at the early 2010s, 2013, 2000, around that time, I believe. And the trauma that creates amongst, you know, the community where he is in Michigan. Family separations takes on many forms. And I think you're exactly right to say it's American as apple pie. It's happened over generations, over centuries, actually. And it's happened across marginalized populations.
Right. But I think the thing that keeps coming up, Jacob, sometimes is even like, I'll say like Black Lives Matter and somebody like George Floyd, you know, gosh, we're so advanced now. We're so progressive. It's 2020. We're never going to, we learned from the past, and that's not the way we do things, you know, and each time it happens, we're like punctured again. And it just kind of happens over and over again. That's why I say the more things change, the more stay the same. But still, it like the judge in the case, one of the cases,
Soboroff, yeah,
the W appointee said, this shocks the conscience.
That's right.
And so thank God that it does, because, you know, one of my, I know it sounds like kind of sideways reference, is Jane's Addiction had this album called Nothing Shocking in the early 90s. Like that, you know, there is something that's still shocking the conscience to see like kids ripped away, and having the 2-year-old Honduran girl, this Getty image that went viral back in 2018. And there's others that, so people still have a heart, even though we're trained to not go there, not like, oh, you know, be a bleeding heart liberal, all those kind of things, which is what Waldman accused White of, remember?
That's right.
That, yeah, oh, I bet you're a bleeding heart liberal. And he's like, no, I got a faith to the Constitution.
He's basically, he I guess, you know, according to people in the room, she basically was trying to suborn perjury. She was trying to get him to lie under oath about what he believed the scientific ramifications of the separations were, and what he had always believed, which were that they were going to damage the children. Right. And yeah, these stories would sound like you couldn't make them up if I didn't know that they were true, you know? Right. But, you know,
that's to hold this up together. I mean, it's like a dumb question, but seeing what you saw, you have to go on the air. You're like a professional. You feel like maybe just like tearing up and your heart's breaking when you're seeing this. Like, how did you do that? How did you like go from being inside there, seeing all this crap, and then like having to just kind of be a pro and say, this is what I saw, everybody?
Yeah, it was hard. Look, it was hard. It was shocking. I was an advanced man. I don't know. Do you know what that is in politics? It's like you go out ahead of the mayor or whatever, and then you tell the mayor, okay, here's. So I was an advanced man for Mayor Bloomberg in New York when I was in college, and then Howard Dean when he ran for president. And I never went to journalism school, actually. But what I learned from being an advanced guy was suck up every little bit of information you possibly can and just spit it out for the boss when they get there so they know what to expect. And for me, I was so emotionally overwhelmed by going into Casa Padre and then into the Ursula Central Processing Station, that for me, it was all about just trying to get out the information that was in the notebook, you know, like, and I think after the fact, I definitely was burnt out. I'm sure that I'm a father of two young kids. I had a son then who was 2 years old. I couldn't comprehend it. And it makes me sick when I go back and think about it today. I'm sure I have some form of like PTSD, from covering this.
Sure.
But what I'll say about that is it's nothing that compares to what these children and their parents go through. The amount of trauma that they have suffered is incomprehensible to me. And literally every single one of them has a story that is both identical to the others and completely different, and I don't know, the undertaking, you can't put a monetary amount on what does it take to fix it, but just for reference, therapy alone currently is going to cost the US government $14 million just to take care of the children. It's something that's going to last a lifetime for them. And so, yeah, for me, was it hard and heavy and overwhelming? Definitely. But then I think about them and I think there's nothing compared to what they all went through.
Yeah. Well, I really respect that answer. Yeah. Thanks. Hey, I'm just noticing it's 6:40. I'm sorry. I'm kind of like,
no worries.
And I'm going to look at some of the questions. Is that cool?
Sure, of course.
Okay. So I might just read over, I might squeeze together two. The first one says, is there any way that any of the people responsible for these actions to hold them responsible? I'm thinking of Miller specifically, gracias. And also the person asked, do you speak Spanish fluently?
The answer to the second question first, no, not at all, which is part of the reason that I was probably the wrong person to cover the story. I think I kind of understand Spanish. I don't know. I'm just too insecure to even try, which is I'm a little ashamed of. But and I did get into some Spanish lessons when I got back to LA after all of this. But no. And like I said, I'm serious about that. That gets to part of the conversation about like who gets to cover these stories, and when I say I was probably the wrong guy, I probably was really the wrong guy. My lived experience is so different from what everybody who went through this went through that the truth is I just happened to be there. And so to me, it became a responsibility to tell the story of what I saw. But there are definitely people who would have been able to handle this, talk with the people affected, et cetera, in a much more effective way, I think, than I did. And then the first question was about Miller.
Yeah, like holding them responsible, like maybe punishing them or doing something.
Well, Biden said it's criminal, and he said it twice in the last debate. And so now the question becomes, what are they going to do? Are they going to take it to his department? Obviously he can't tell the Department of Justice what to do, but if his Department of Justice is going to look into it, I guess I'm not a lawyer either, but my understanding is it comes down to intent. What did they intend to do in separating these children? And if it was truly harm, which it certainly appears to be, I think that there could be legal consequences, although, I don't know. I hear from a lot of people all the time who say these people should be sent to The Hague and be tried before the International Criminal Court.
Okay, thanks. Hey, another, I heard Biden saying something, he wants to move on. And that's kind of maybe related to Trump and pardons and all that other stuff. But let's go back to these questions. Do you ever send any of the profits from the book to the families? Also as a thank you or acknowledgement that without them, there would be no book.
I did, yeah. And I actually don't, I'm glad you asked. I've always said, like, if anybody asks, sure, I'll talk about it publicly, but I didn't publicize it because why publicize it? I'm not doing that to get people to buy the book, but I absolutely did. And I don't want to say the amount because I just don't think, I'm not looking for accolades or criticism, both, I guess. I'm sure some people would say give more. Some people say, hey, that's a lot of money. But definitely. And to many different organizations, including MSF on the border, Doctors Without Borders, who's down there doing work. Mm-hmm. The Red Cross has done work down there. Al Otro Lado. There's an organization here in LA called This Is About Humanity that partners, especially during COVID. Some of the money that I made from the book I gave to several different efforts that are working to provide safe housing for refugees that are, largely waiting to get into the United States from Mexico during COVID, and we have this MPP policy that's making folks wait in Mexico. So sorry for a long answer, but yes, I definitely gave some of the proceeds from the book back to causes related to the border, and continue to.
Okay. Just reading through the comments here.
Sure.
Is there any comment on the militarization of ICE and the infiltration of ICE by the far right?
Is the militarization of ICE? Yeah, I didn't watch. Did you see what was it called? Immigration Nation? I didn't watch it. Did you watch it on Netflix?
No, I did. All my students are saying I need to watch that.
I know, me too. A lot of people are telling me to watch it.
Yeah, Undocumented. It's a good series on Netflix too. But, yeah.
All of these agencies have become militarized. You know, I was just down on the border looking at the construction of the wall. I think it's a big mistake to say Trump failed in building the wall. He's built the wall, and it is militarized as hell down there. I was surveilled and followed by the Border Patrol, and they admitted it, and we did a report about it for NBC. These agencies are only becoming more militarized, more empowered, and I think we got a real debate on our hands between the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and the more moderate wing about what to do. And I thought it was really impressive that during the presidential campaign, we heard from Juan Castro about getting rid of 1325, you know, the law that allowed them to separate. You know, when it comes to ICE, I think there's gonna, you know what, I don't know. You know, will there be a wholesale reexamination of what these agencies are? I think there should be, but we'll see, because like I said, the track record of the Obama-Biden administration is not one when it comes to ICE. You know, they deported more people than ever. That is reassuring to folks.
You know, something that just in terms of our language, you know, like the BLM and others, you know, talk about, and it's not just them, many people have talked about it even before them, that they of course tip their hat to, about like abolishing the prison system or like defunding the police. But abolish ICE as a rallying cry, like as a demand, was gaining a lot of traction, mainly because of different things, but of course the child separation issue, family separation. But there are people obviously in progressive wing of the Democratic Party that want to quote abolish ICE.
Yeah.
And there are other people who are like, hey, that's going a bridge too far. We can't go there right now. But I'd be interested to see if that debate like reemerges about.
Well, look, you know, folks like AOC are not going to let it go, you know,
Right.
I don't think they should. Why not have this conversation now? You know, we contributed just a little bit of reporting that was broken by John Washington and his colleagues at The Intercept and Tina Vasquez at Prism about the hysterectomies and the unwanted medical procedures at Irwin, you know,
Right.
and
57 women now, I think.
Yeah. You gotta look at, these are systemic issues. You know, these are not, yes, it's one doctor, but when you talk about a lack of oversight, that oversight applies to the horrific conditions where COVID is spreading through these facilities too. It applies to the way that the separated parents were treated when they were in these facilities. You know, these are systemic issues. And by the way, I haven't said they're for-profit facilities, most of them, right? So people are making money by locking up refugees and migrants. And you know, the idea is that's an unsustainable system, and certainly not a humanitarian one.
Can you mention just briefly the other story that broke yesterday, I think in the New York Times, about the using COVID as a precondition to block folks from coming in?
Yeah. So Title 42 is a public health law. I didn't know anything about this stuff before I, really started covering this, but Title 42 is a public health law. And that's the justification the Trump administration has used to keep out virtually everybody. They've expelled thousands of unaccompanied children, I think 150,000 or 200,000 people total, immediately once they enter the country. They're going around an anti-human trafficking law to kick kids out of the country. Remember, they were keeping them in hotels with like little to no legal protections, no due process, no access to lawyers, and sending them out of the country immediately, circumventing what's called the TVPRA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act.
Right.
And so this federal court yesterday just said that's illegal. You can't do that. And so it has, like has happened so many times, including, Chad Wolf being deemed the illegal, ironically, Secretary of Homeland Security just the other day. over what they did on DACA, just saying, this, you can't do it. And so does it make it any better for the thousands, tens of thousands of people who have been kicked out of the country with no recourse? No, absolutely not. But now the ball's in Biden's court, to talk about, is this something they're going to try to keep going?
Right. Right. Yeah. And what's your thought about, I think Cecilia Munoz has been aired out as somebody that's going to come into the Biden administration, immigration.
Yeah.
Given her role in the previous administration, though, a lot of immigrant rights advocates are not happy about her.
That's for sure. I talked to Cecilia for the book. She's quoted on the record in the book. I went to see her at her office. She's always been willing to engage with me on these issues. But she does not have a lot of fans in the immigrant activist community who, protested for the DREAM Act, protested against the deportations. They're very angry with the Obama-Biden record on immigration. And just the idea that she's involved peripherally, informally on the transition team has got a lot of people very upset. For me, I think ultimately what's going to, show that she's either going to be successful or fail is not the fact that she's personally involved, but what the policies are going to be. And they have this opportunity now during the transition to step up and say, here's what we're going to do about the separated families. Here's what we're going to do about Title 42, about family detention centers, about interior enforcement and deportations and removals. So, do I think people are happy that she's on board from the wing of the party and the wing of the activist community that protested them previously? No, of course not. But now I think people are looking to the policies more than they are looking to her. I just think that they think that that's a worrisome sign.
Yeah, right. There's two questions I want to get in here at the same time. And
Sure.
I'm looking at our time. We got maybe 7-8 minutes. Of course, folks are saying, how can we help? Even, besides money, like always, like, what are we going to do? And I think you had a very interesting response. Like, it's the policy. Like,
Yeah.
When there's a, little anecdote that you put in there. But let me read this other question. I think this is actually from one of my students.
Sure.
At my community college, I did a research paper about the zero tolerance policy, especially about PTSD and separation anxiety kids will have, and finding out that the government won't pay for the damage they did is madness. How can these families move forward? And do you think the new government will do something about these issues, considering Biden didn't really say much about immigration?
I was shocked. On such a good question. And I was shocked, honestly, that how little this came up, given the fact that it was Trump's signature issue, Yeah. But finally, in the last debate, my colleague, Kristen Welker, brought it up, and there was a pretty substantive conversation about immigration issues. I'm just looking at the question, how can the families move forward? I really don't know, and everything that I know from spending time around mental health professionals, trauma specialists, it's going to be really difficult. And I think that, how can you help? You can help by understanding and acknowledging that, and talking about it and keeping the story alive.
I want to say something just about that too. I'm sorry, Jacob, to interrupt you.
Please.
There's lots of advocacy-based groups here in Santa Barbara County and Santa Barbara proper. There's causes, in La Casa de la Raza, and I'm trying to think of other organizations. I'm like blanking out. Immigrant Legal Defense Center. There's lots of groups at UCSB too. So there's probably never enough, but there's lots of ways to plug in here locally for activist-oriented groups that are trying to. And people have been doing this for decades too in Santa Barbara, like many countries, many cities and communities across the United States.
And if I could just say, all these groups, as I write in the book, and I've said many times, I've come to believe that they're as important as any first responder on any front line. I think they're doing life-saving work. Mm-hmm. Literally life-saving work. Who knows what would happen to Juan had he been deported back to his home country, back to Guatemala, back to Petén, mm-hmm. Instead of being, connected with Alfonso and Lindsay. There's no way to know for sure, but, these legal service, they're pro bono, they are doing incredible, extraordinary work, and it is grueling work that they are doing too. I'm sure, you see that in Santa Barbara.
The ACLU attorney, what's his name?
Legal Learned.
Sorry about that. Kind of indefatigable. Like the guy is always there, right?
What a character. The guy is a maniac. I mean, he is everywhere. He just did the Title 42 case. So we were just talking about, in addition to the zero tolerance, the Miss L.
Yeah, let's see. Is there another question up there? You got the questions on your side, right?
Yeah, I'm just looking through them too.
What will happen to the children who can't be reunited with their parents?
Well, many of the children or most, if not all of the children are with family members or sponsors in the interior of the United States right now. The idea would be to bring all the parents, legal alert, you just mentioned him. The ACLU wants to bring each and every parent who was deported without their children, and there are over 1,000, I think, back to the US to be reunited. And so what happens if they never get back with their parents? I don't know. I mean, I was talking to a little boy from Honduras. It was maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. He was separated when he was 6 or 7. He now speaks perfect English. He's been going to school in the US for 2 years, almost 3 years, because he was separated during the pilot program, and his dad's still stuck in Honduras. And Al Otro Lado, and a group that I mentioned, is working right now to try to bring the father back. But there are no guarantees. This is a story that doesn't have happy endings, I'm sorry to say. Even with families who are reunited, it's not going to be happy endings, which is why I say we'll remember this one day with all those other horrible events that have happened, in our nation.
I think about reading years ago, a very powerful book was Enrique's Journey, Sonia Nizato, the LA Times reporter. And so when the Enrique was finally reunited with his mom, there were tons of issues, so everybody thinks they live happily ever after. It's not so much, not even by a long shot. And that's a different kind of separation than you're talking about here, Jacob.
But it's still abandonment and issues, psychological issues that, the further you are away, the doctors tell me, from the trauma and getting help for the trauma, the harder it is to recover. And so, especially for the kids who are still separated, it's a big uphill battle.
Right. Oh, wait a minute. Oops. We went to a little different screen there.
Oh yeah, I see the book there too.
So yeah, maybe this is a polite reminder. I think Michael told us that it was we had until 7, and we're almost right at 7. But here's the book. Go out and get it, and go to Chaucer's, because you can still do it. The COVID cases are spiking. It's really terrifying a little bit, obviously, and what's going on. But Chaucer's is open for business, and just want to encourage people to go there. It's such a great bookstore, and the staff there are so accommodating.
It's a wonderful place, and Professor, I just want to say thanks again to you, and thank you to Chaucer's. But I feel like I have a new friend in meeting you there, and and this really was cool. And I hope one day soon, when all this COVID stuff is over, that we can get together in person. I can come up, maybe visit a class, or if you're down in LA, we'll go to a ball game.
Totally, yeah. We need to get you here on campus for sure. Thanks so much.
I love that. Okay, thanks, Professor, and thanks to everybody watching.
Yeah. No
Take
problem.
care.
Okay. Bye.
So long.
Are we saying?